Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 604, Unto My Books, So Good to Turn. Now, in many ways, we are back to the great question regarding Emily. Namely, what did she read? And to what degree did those books inform her life? Here we're going to get a kind of a little bit of a picture on Emily as reader. Now, the great biographer Wisher said in his 1938 offering, this was a poet, quote, "All her life, Emily Dickinson was an eager reader. Books, however, were not her masters, but her friends. She turned to them because they offered solace and transport for the far ends of tired days," quoting specifically from this poem. Her attitude was Emersonian. A poet's first business was less with the literature of old than with the impressions of life thronging about him. Nevertheless, she cherished her small library of favorites as a resource when her imagination flagged. They brought her inspiration and stimulus. No English-speaking poet since Chaucer has written more engagingly than she in praise of books. An amazing quote. Now, in some ways, we're back to poem 371. You guys will maybe remember this one when we did it together. A precious moldering pleasure 'tis to meet an antique book in just the dress his century wore. A privilege, I think, his venerable hand to take, and warming in our own a passage back or two to make to times when he was young. His quaint opinions to inspect, his thought to ascertain on themes certain our mutual mind, the literature of man, mutual mind being central. When interested scholars most, what competitions ran when Plato was a certainty and Sophocles a man, when Sappho was a living girl, and Beatrice wore the ground that Dante deified. Facts, centuries before, he traverses familiar as one should come to town and tell you all your dreams were true. He lived where dreams were born. His presence is enchantment. You beg him not to go. Old volumes shake their vellum heads and tantalize just so. From vellum we'll go to kid here in this poem. Now, this poem was published in the Book of Scorpion, the Hampshire bookshop in Northampton, Massachusetts, in June of 1924. Now, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments where we commented on Emily's love of books. And as well, I'm hopeful that you've already read the preceding 603 poems. We just finished with 603, He Found My Being. Now, if you have done that, you will be able to place this poem and the reverence contained within this poem with other poems that we've studied. We obviously just did 371. Now, the question that many scholars ask about Emily's reading is, did she read broad or did she just read deep? It isn't clear exactly. The great biographer Sewell has said it this way, quote, in a letter on this subject written to a friend by Emily, Joseph Lyman, she said the following. She tells how when the doctor finally removed the restriction which was for a long time placed on her reading, quote, she said, "My blood-bounded Shakespeare was the first, and as I devoured the luscious pages, I thought I should tear the leaves out as I turned them." And Sewell will comment, quote, "Few poets have ever confessed so vicarious a passion," end quote. We've also got the same observation being made again, that when Emily had this eye ordeal in 1864 to 65, it was an eye problem that disabled her. She wrote, that prevented her from reading. She wrote it as, quote, "The only woe that ever made me tremble, a shutting out of the dearest ones of time, the strongest friends of the soul, books." And she capitalized all the letters of books. One scholar has said it this way: books for Emily, unlike people, both promise pleasure and deliver satisfaction. The great scholar Priest has pointed that one out. Now, with that in mind, as we turn to read this poem, let's enjoy Emily's celebration. We pointed out that Emily seems to suggest there's two kinds of prayers. There's the prayer of help, and we've seen a number of poems in that regard. But there's that second prayer, the prayer of thank you, or the prayer of gratitude and thanks. It seems that this is a tribute poem to the books that produced Emily's life, rich life. Unto my books, so good to turn, far inns of tired days, it half endears the abstinence, and pain is missed in praise. As flavors cheer retarded guests with banquetings to be, so spices stimulate the time, till my small library, it may be wilderness without, far feet of failing men, but holiday excludes the night, and it is bells within. I thank these kinsmen of the shelf, their countenances kid, enamor in perspective, and satisfy obtained. Now, again, notice the personal dynamics of this poem. Unto my books. Now, we know that Emily actually used her father's library. We do have a number of the books that Emily read, and even some annotations inside of them, some markings, horizontal markings and the like. Notice, though, she says, unto my books, dash, so good to turn. Notice the double meaning. It's so good to turn to them. The books themselves are so good. Far inns of tired days. And immediately we're reminded, Emily was no academic. She didn't get to spend her life all day just reading books as she would probably have wanted to. Emily lived a rich life, but it was a fairly repetitive life. It was a life where she had all these household duties that she had to do, as we've commented, great baker of bread and other things. And it would only be at the end of long, hard days that finally she would be allowed to enjoy her book. So notice, far ends of tired days. It half endears the abstinence. In other words, it's almost like having to go through the day. The only way she can get through it is the promise of the books that she will enjoy at the end of it. And pain is missed in praise. Pain, as we've commented before in 52 of her poems. Emily is the great poet of pain, as we know. And yet, notice, this pain that she goes through can be somehow balanced, equilibrated with the promise of a book. And then we'll go from as to so with this wonderful tasting of books. You'll remember in our study of Bacon's of Studies, we'll maybe read a passage out of this that he comments on. Some books are to be tasted. So here we go to flavors. As flavors cheer retarded guests, here retarded simply meaning late arriving, with banquetings to be. In other words, the anticipation. You haven't yet arrived for the banquet, so you begin to imagine what it will be like. So, spices stimulate the time. And I think stimulate is the key word of this poem. Till my small library. By the way, you'll remember our comment about her use of the word small in 77 poems. And then many scholars have pointed out that what will be referenced next, potentially, is the horrific war that Emily is living to. As we've said, only a handful of Civil War poems where she even mentions it, but there seems to be a reference here with the word wilderness. It may be wilderness, dash, without, dash, far feet of failing men. Makes sense, right? But holiday excludes the night, and it is bells within. In other words, is it possible that the only way that Emily got through the hell of the war was through her books? Very, very possible. And then she says in her final gratitude moment, I thank these kinsmen of the shelf. What a brilliant, I mean, this is awesome. For those of us who, of course, love a book like Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book, and of course, his celebration of the great works that have often been challenged, and yet Adler himself would admit that Emily Dickinson's poetry has to be on that shelf at some point. Yes, kinsmen of the shelf. Notice her identification with these writers. Their countenances kid. It's wonderful here. Kid, of course, being the kid leather that will hold the books, but it's also great because the kid, the kidding, the joking, the challenging of those countenances enamor. Now, in 13 different poems, she'll use this phrase enamor. We'll come back to it when we do 606 here in a little bit. Far psalmistries of summer, enamoring the ear. This idea of enamor is another, I think, key word. In perspective. In other words, the thinking about what's coming, the perspective, I think, is in fact another key word here. The same books, though, satisfy once they are obtained. Now, when we get to 791 in our study, we'll come back to this. God gave a loaf to every bird, but just a crumb to me. I dare not eat it, though I starve. My poignant luxury, to own it, touch it, prove the feet that made the palate mine. Too happy for my sparrow's chance, for ampler coveting. It may be famine all around, she called it wilderness in this poem. I could not miss an ear, such plenty smiles upon my board, my gardener shows so fair. I wonder how the rich may feel, an Indiaman, an earl. I deem that I, with but a crumb, am sovereign of them all. It only takes a little bit of reading. And then when we get to 1263, we'll come back to this study again to enjoy this poem. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without oppress of toil. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. And then finally, when we get to 1430, one more time, we'll play a similar game. She says it this way: who never wanted maddest joy remains to him unknown. The banquet of abstemiousness defaces that of wine. Within its reach, though yet ungrasps desire's perfect goal, no nearer lest the actual should disenthrall thy soul. This, again, Emily, the great poet of longing as well, and here we are. What are we going to say about a poem like this? I think that her argument is that reading is the greatest pleasure that we can enjoy. And for those of us, obviously, reading through and studying all 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition, we're coming to terms, I think, with this idea. Every poem is such a pleasure. We're enamored of it in some profound way, no doubt. The to be, well, of course, there is the turning from the hard day to the reading, and of course the personification with Kinsman of the Shelf. At 3a, well, I think that Bacon's of Studies is standing behind much of this. You guys will remember our study of this poem. We've given full lectures on it at learnstrong.net. What is it that he says? Crafty men condemn studies, simple men admire them, and wise men use them. For they teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them, and above them, won by observation. Read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and so few to be chewed and digested. That is, some books are to be read only in parts, others to be read but not curiously, and some few, and that of course is our Emily here, to be read wholly and with diligence and attention. We hope that obviously we're giving that. Some books also may be read by deputy. Some of you obviously just listening to me talk about these poems as opposed to reading them yourself. And extracts made of them by others, but that would be only in the less important arguments and the meaner sort of books, else distilled books are like common distilled waters, flashy things. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. And therefore, if a man write little, he had need have a great memory. If he confer little, he had need have a present wit. And if he read little, he had need have much cunning, to seem to know that he doth not. And of course, the idea that studies develop into habits, as he quotes it out of the Latin, Emily would definitely agree with as well. Finally, in 3b, who are your kinsmen of the shelf? And is it possible that Emily is now becoming one of those? I certainly hope so. Thank you.